Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 22nd High-Level Alliance Against Trafficking in Persons Conference. I'm Valiant Richey, OSCE Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings, and I am delighted to see so many of you here in person coming from all over the OSCE region and beyond. Over 800 people have registered for this conference, and there's a lot of you here in the room and many more online. A heartfelt welcome to everyone joining us here in Vienna or from your offices or homes around the OSCE region. Before getting started and before giving the floor to the OSCE Secretary General for her welcoming remarks, allow me to make some brief technical announcements. I would like to thank all participants in the room for silencing your phones. It's actually been about 3 years since I've had to make that comment, so thank you all for listening. For those online, please ensure that your microphone is muted and your camera is disabled at all times, except when taking the floor. This will allow everyone to follow the discussions without disturbance. All of you here in the room and on Zoom can register to ask questions to our panelists and deliver short statements of a maximum of 2 minutes. Registrations are recorded with our colleague Evan Carr. He is here in the room with us, or you can send a message to floor request in the Zoom chat box. Please specify your name and surname as well as your country for state representatives or the organization that you are representing for civil society and international organizations. Please also make sure that you indicate the session during which you would like to deliver your statement. If your intention is longer than 2 minutes, if your intervention is longer than 2 minutes, we encourage you to send your written statement to info-cthb@osce.org and we will circulate it. In sessions where more statements from the floor are requested than can be delivered, state representatives will be given priority. Please also note that statements are expected only during the panel discussions and not after the keynote segment. For those of you watching the live stream or following the conference on Zoom, don't miss the conversation on Twitter. You can direct your questions to the handle @OSCE_CTHB and ask us questions with the hashtag CTHB22 or hashtag AskOSCE. The next 3 days are about victims of trafficking and the actions we must all take to protect them, to uphold their rights, to assist them in recovering from the trauma and harm they have suffered, and to empower them to regain their agency and contribute to society with their talents and aspirations. It's about who we want to be as a society, one that protects the most vulnerable and their rights, or one that sits silently and lets exploitation and trafficking run their course. The truth is that we still, as a society, are largely blind to the reality and the scale of trafficking and exploitation. This conference seeks to shed a light on that reality and to identify a way forward. And with that, let's kick off this 22nd Alliance Conference. We are delighted to have with us for her welcoming remarks the OSCE Secretary General, Helga Maria Schmid. Secretary General, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Val. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome you to the 22nd Alliance Against Trafficking in Persons conference together with our special representative. This year's topic could not be more fitting with today's reality, and discussions could not be more timely. We all know that violent conflict increases a range of risks to populations. We know that people fleeing violence, displaced from their homes, and facing tremendous uncertainty are vulnerable to traffickers. Millions of Ukrainians have been forced from their homes. Astonishing numbers of people, mostly women and children, are on the move, displaced within their country or seeking refuge abroad. The risks they face are very real. And that is why combating trafficking is a top priority for the OSCE, now more than ever. Experience of previous crises has taught us that criminal groups and individuals will take advantage of large flows of people to exploit the most vulnerable among them. This happens in both transit and in destination countries. We also know that women and children make up the majority of identified trafficking victims. Over 90% of all identified victims of trafficking for sexual exploitation are women and girls, and nearly 100% of those who use them are men. We know the risks. We also know that we can work together to mitigate them. As people began to flee the violence in Ukraine, the OSCE issued recommendations to assist states in mitigating risks and preventing the evolution of this humanitarian crisis into a human trafficking one. These practical recommendations were designed to be enacted in the immediate term to address those vulnerabilities that traffickers will otherwise try to exploit. This was an important first step, but there's more to do. We need to stay vigilant and be ready to not only prevent potential trafficking, but also to prevent victims of trafficking. We're already seeing troubling signs, including spikes in online searches for Ukrainian women for sex. This is why the focus of the Alliance Conference could not be more timely. It is always the time to protect the most vulnerable, and today's reality is a sobering reminder that we need to do more. Human trafficking is as embedded in our societies and economies as it has ever been. There are an estimated 25 million victims worldwide. Their exploitation generates some $150 billion in profit a year for their traffickers. The scale of the problem is growing, and so is its pervasiveness in our lives. We all know we need to act, but no country can defeat trafficking on its own. Combating trafficking in human beings requires effective multilateralism. Large, complex, and common problems are best tackled together with jointly designed strategies and approaches. This is where the OSCE adds real value in helping to address this complex problem. The OSCE's participating states include countries of origin, transit, and destination. Working together, we can design common strategies to address all stages of the crime, from recruitment to exploitation. On protection, we have a good deal of experience. In response to the migration crisis in the Mediterranean and along the so-called Balkan transit route, we developed guidance on how to best identify and protect victims of trafficking in mixed migration flows. Later, we helped put policy guidance into practice with training for practitioners on the ground, including in our flagship simulations-based exercises, which are now available across the whole OSCE region. We are also providing policy guidance by developing comprehensive recommendations to improve state-led identification of victims. This innovative approach will allow for multiple actors, social welfare agencies, as well as law enforcement authorities to formally identify victims of trafficking. This is incredibly important in building bridges and enhancing trust between state authorities and victims. In all this work, we are working to ensure that the needs of the most vulnerable are understood and are addressed. The OSCE study, applying gender-sensitive approaches in combating trafficking in human beings, is being used and distributed well outside the OSCE region to protect victims according to their specific needs. Building on this expertise, we are working with ODIHR to analyze how minorities are affected by human trafficking. We are also working to combat the dramatic and growing reality of child trafficking. 1 in 3 trafficking victims is a child, 1 in 3. So we've developed guidance to help authorities uphold the best interest of the child, and have also supported the creation of focal point structures to help prevent the trafficking of children and to help protect and address the needs of those who have fallen prey to traffickers. This is a sobering topic, and yet there is so much we can do. I'm grateful for the work that the OSCE Office of the Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings has done over the years, as well as others across the OSCE. And I'm grateful to all of you for joining us today. Identifying and protecting victims of trafficking, including child victims, is a legal obligation under international law and a political commitment of all OSCE participating states. And it is a moral obligation, and one to which we are deeply committed. Protecting victims is vital work that we can all play a role in pursuing. So thank you all for joining us today. Together we can make a real difference in addressing human trafficking, protecting victims' rights, and strengthening assistance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, particularly for highlighting how important and timely this discussion is today, and how crucial it is to understand the harsh reality of trafficking and to act jointly and decisively. Before moving to the opening session, let me share a short personal story. As a young prosecutor in the United States, one of the first cases I ever worked on involved a teenage girl convicted of prostitution. I was handling her case post-conviction when she was caught posting prostitution ads on a website in violation of her sentence. I asked the judge to punish her. But instead, the judge, who had seen a lot more vulnerable youth than I had, offered her support services. A decade later, I was on the other side of that equation, prosecuting the traffickers who preyed on children and the men who paid to have sex with them. I learned that most of their victims had themselves been prosecuted for minor crimes before, during, or after their exploitation. I often thought back to that early case and how ignorant I was of the circumstances of that girl's life, the probability that she was exploited, and the harm she must have suffered at the hands of her abusers. My error of judgment as a young prosecutor was not an isolated incident nor a historical relic. Countries consistently continue to prosecute and punish victims of trafficking, including even children, instead of offering them support, shelter, food, medical care, counseling, job training, legal aid, and compensation they desperately need. We must have the courage to self-reflect, to say that we have sometimes made mistakes so that we can learn from those mistakes and achieve a purer form of justice. This year's Alliance Conference will focus on how to close the gap between our principles and our actions. It will focus on our obligation to protect and assist, and will strive to make sure that victims of trafficking are seen, heard, believed, protected, and empowered. The agenda of this conference is designed to confront these issues and to discuss how to achieve our goals of protection. At the moment, looking broadly at the OSCE area, very significant challenges persist in the area of victim protection. From the structural point of view, the formal identification of trafficking victims in the OSCE region largely remains a sole prerogative of law enforcement authorities, as the Secretary General just emphasized. As a consequence, identification and assistance in some states, especially in countries of destination, continues to be conditioned on victims' willingness to cooperate with the criminal justice system, which I think we must acknowledge is a not so subtle form of coercion that leads in fact to less support and assistance to victims and fewer successful cases. Panel 1, later today, will look at these structures of protection and assistance. We'll examine how to build more effective protection systems, and we'll discuss what states have been doing and still need to do to achieve that. Unfortunately, current protection efforts often do not offer non-discriminatory and needs-based assistance that is sensitive to individual circumstances. System biases and stereotypes often lead to assumptions about various forms of exploitation vis-a-vis victims' gender, and as a consequence, insufficient attention is paid to some forms of exploitation or some victims. Globally, the majority of identified victims by states continues to be women and girls who are victims of trafficking for sexual exploitation, while men and boys, if they are identified in the first place, are commonly presumed to only be victims of labor exploitation. The fact that women and men, girls and boys are exploited for a wide range of purposes is often overlooked by systems that are not designed to be nuanced. And that's a problem because we are missing too many victims. Panel 2 will focus on vulnerabilities, on the needs of the victims who often remain overlooked or for whom the protection response needs to be developed or improved, including national minorities, people with disabilities, people on the move, or those seeking refuge from armed conflicts. The panel will strive to shed light on all those victims who, for one reason or another, including because of their gender, do not align with our concept of the ideal victims. Another piece in this conversation, and one, as the Secretary General just pointed out, whose importance is only going to increase in the months and years to come, is protecting child victims of trafficking. Trafficking in children continues to be on the rise. In 2004, 13% of identified victims of trafficking were children. By 2018, that number had risen to 34%, with the COVID pandemic pushing for a further increase. Child victims of trafficking are entitled to special protection measures, both as children and as victims. Safety, protection, and assistance are fundamental for the fulfillment and enjoyment of children's rights, and vigorous measures should be taken against all forms of child exploitation offline and online. Panel 3 will examine available tools for the development of durable solutions in the best interests of trafficked children. It will look at ways to reinforce the role of state child protection agencies in national anti-trafficking responses and discuss how this role can be strengthened through better cross-border cooperation and exchange of information between countries. Finally, in panel 4, we'll look ahead and try to identify the way forward toward inclusive and comprehensive protection systems. We will discuss measures that should be implemented to fully integrate a victim-centered and human rights-based approach into modern-day anti-trafficking action and ensure that victims come first in policies and in practice. To complement this comprehensive program, we have a rich set of side events, I think the most ever in an Alliance conference, and I'm grateful to our friends and partners who organize so many of them. This is part of the spirit of the Alliance Conference, of course. So let me just highlight that the side event that is organized by my office, where we will discuss gender-sensitive approaches to protection of victims of trafficking. This is the only one I think that will be held in a blended format, both online and in person, here in the Hofburg, in the Ratsal tomorrow morning. And I'd like to invite you all to join it, including delegates here in the room. The others will be online and you can find them in the program. In short, this Alliance Conference will provide an opportunity to reflect on the best systems and structures to identify and protect victims. It will address how to recognize and consider their vulnerabilities, how to properly tailor our interventions when the victims in question are children, and what needs to be done to improve current systems. To talk about these issues, we have a number of highly esteemed speakers. The first, and it's an honor for me to introduce him, is Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland and OSCE Chairperson-in-Office, Zbigniew Rau. Minister, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as the OSCE Chairman-in-Office, I am pleased to welcome you at the 22nd Conference of the OSCE Alliance Against Trafficking in Persons. I would like to express my utmost gratitude to the OSCE Special Representative and Co-ordinator for combating trafficking in human beings, Mr. Valiant Richey, and his office for the tireless work. Ladies and gentlemen, sadly, while this conference takes place, the full-scale Russian military aggression against Ukraine continues. The invasion is a blatant violation of international law and principles that guided our cooperation in this forum since its very beginning. A total disregard of international humanitarian law has been continuously shown by Russia. The latest images of the Bucha massacre perpetrated by the Russian armed forces are sickening. They call for immediate action of the whole civilized community of nations. Every day brings new reports on killed, injured, and disabled civilians. Millions of them, mostly women, children, and the elderly, have already left Ukraine and arrived in the neighboring countries, mostly in Poland. Poland that is determined to offer assistance and support anyone fleeing the war. Unfortunately, once crossed the borders of the neighboring countries, the refugees may become victims of trafficking, having accepted the promise of a free transportation or accommodation. Being aware of this challenge, the Polish border guard, police, and other authorities have taken steps to prevent and counter human trafficking. Fortunately, attempts to exploit women and children in this context have not been confirmed yet. Also, the number of suspicions of such offenses investigated by the National Public Prosecutor's Office concerns only a few cases. Our authorities have also undertaken necessary information campaigns. To this scope, special alerts are sent to people coming to Poland from Ukraine, containing comprehensive information on potential threats, possible assistance, and dedicated hotline numbers. Moreover, informational leaflets available in 3 languages, including Ukrainian, are distributed in the reception centers and the railway stations. Furthermore, a new legal solution is being prepared to keep records of the unaccompanied minors of Ukrainian citizens and their actual caregivers. In addition, the newly adopted Act of Parliament on assistance to Ukrainian citizens in connection with the armed conflict in the territory of that state has strengthened legal sanctions for the crime of trafficking in human beings. Ladies and gentlemen, the measures addressing the refugee flow are not entirely new. They follow up on solutions already used by Poland in the area of countering trafficking in human beings. To this scope, we implemented a number of comprehensive measures aimed at efficient diagnosis of cases of human trafficking, constant monitoring of this phenomenon, providing protection to victims. We have developed a coordinated system of support for victims of human trafficking, guaranteeing assistance in such cases. Its most important element includes close cooperation with non-governmental organizations. It is designed to meet the needs of victims of human trafficking, Polish nationals and foreigners alike, and to help people at risk. The tasks include, first, running a helpline for victims and witnesses of trafficking in human beings. Second, providing crisis intervention and assistance in reintegration. And third, running shelters and arranging safe accommodation. Ladies and gentlemen, preventing and countering trafficking in human beings is a responsibility of all the OSCE participating states. This issue, always relevant, has become of increasing importance due to the scale of the refugee flow that we are facing. Our organization should be better prepared to address those challenges. We all should act in good faith to elevate the plight of those that have been forced to flee areas of conflict. They are the most vulnerable victims prone to exploitation. As politicians, diplomats, and public figures, we bear the special responsibility in this regard. Therefore, I would like to commend all those who are engaged in helping people in need. Thank you for your compassion, dedication, expertise, and hard work. Ladies and gentlemen, I do hope that this conference will help to prevent it will help to present new recommendations that will reflect the enormous challenges that we currently face. I look forward to your feedback and our future collaboration. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Rao. And let me take this opportunity to commend Poland for its strong response to an unprecedented flow of people that I witnessed when I went to the border in Poland, and Poland's strong response both through awareness campaigns that you mentioned to contribute to prevention, attention to the criminal justice system, including through increased sanctions that were just recently adopted, which is excellent, and protection guarantees that you outlined. This is the essence of the 3P approach that is set out in OSCE documents, and I thank Poland for its strong work in this area. Next on the speaker list is the Director of the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, Matteo Mecacci. We collaborate regularly with ODIHR, which undertakes a number of important anti-trafficking initiatives in the OSCE. And I'm delighted to have you here with us today. Matteo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to start by thanking the Office of the Special Representative and Coordinator to Combat Trafficking in Human Beings for organizing this conference, a hallmark in the annual OSCE calendar. Painfully aware today of the huge risk Ukrainian refugees and IDPs have to endure being exposed to human trafficking, this forum for exchange, cooperation, and coordination on preventing and combating trafficking in human beings could not be more relevant and important. Indeed, the theme of this year's conference, Protection, Upholding Victims' Rights and Strengthening Assistance, offers a timely discussion against the backdrop of the overall situation in our region, and in particular of the humanitarian crisis resulting from the Russian Federation invasion of Ukraine. As part of our work in response to this crisis, at ODIHR we continue to increase our assistance to OSCE participating states on countering trafficking in human beings and to strengthening national referral mechanisms with a particular focus on trafficking of children and women. ODIHR is well positioned to provide assistance to states at such a delicate moment in time. Since 1999, we have built our expertise in the promotion of victim-centered, gender-sensitive, and human rights-based approaches, in line with ODIHR's mandate for the establishment and strengthening of national referral mechanisms. As a proof of this, our new publication, the National Referral Mechanism Handbook, is already a recognized assistance tool for all actors involved in anti-trafficking efforts. Released in January, this ODIHR publication provides up-to-date and holistic guidance on how countries can reinforce protection and assistance for victims and survivors of trafficking through national referral mechanisms, usually referred to as NRMs. NRMs, as cooperative frameworks helping governments to protect and promote the human rights of victims of trafficking, are crucial tools to ensure the coordination among all relevant anti-trafficking actors, paving the way for a multidisciplinary approach among government, civil society, the private sector, and survivors of trafficking, among others. NRMs are a cornerstone of victims' protection and are more important today than ever. While many anti-trafficking stakeholders are truly committed to combating these heinous crimes, often initiatives lack a victim-centered, gender-sensitive, and/or trauma-informed approach. I invite you all to participate in our ODIHR side event tomorrow, where we will focus on the importance of strong national referral mechanisms, especially when it comes to the most vulnerable among us, children. The event will inform about the updated NRM Handbook and provide a platform to discuss ways to strengthen protection of adult and child victims. In order to make protection frameworks such as NRM work, it is of utmost importance to incorporate the expertise of those that have been affected by this vicious crime in prevention, protection, prosecution, or partnership. ODIHR is therefore proud and grateful to benefit from the insight of our International Survivors of Trafficking Advisory Council and a network of other survivor leaders. This approach and its impact are in fact subject to a second ODIHR side event later today. Ladies and gentlemen, we are undoubtedly going through one of the most challenging times in our history. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the vulnerabilities of women, men, boys, and girls to various forms of human trafficking. At the same time, also severely impacting the ability of government and civil society to protect and assist victims and survivors of trafficking. With the pandemic not yet under control, we already find ourselves faced with the next challenge, an enormous flow of refugees, mostly women and children, trying to escape from the unfolding war in Ukraine and the challenge this poses encountering human trafficking. It is up to all of us, government, civil society, international organizations, all frontline actors, and of course, the OSCE and ODIHR to prevent vulnerable groups from being trafficked and to ensure the comprehensive protection of all those who have, despite all efforts, become subject to this crime. It is crucial to join efforts and to benefit from each other's expertise to combat this crime and to do everything within our power to prevent it in the first place. I hope, as it has been mentioned also by Chairman Rao, that this conference will provide inspiration and motivation to work against trafficking of human beings more vigorously than ever before, and to put the protection of victims and survivors front and center of this effort. ODIHR stands ready to support all OSCE participating states in this endeavor. I thank you very much for your attention and for your commitment to combat trafficking in human beings.
Thank you very much, Matteo, and in particular for highlighting a really crucial piece of the anti-trafficking response, national referral mechanisms. I think the reality is, and this is a crucial point and a reason to attend the side event you mentioned, the reality is that countries with national referral mechanisms do better at identifying and protecting trafficking victims than those countries that don't have them. So I encourage all governments to take a close look at this proposal and the handbook that was mentioned.